Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to continue with our 3D Studio Max lessons, and we're going to cover basic materials and go over the material editor and just do some standard materials. Just kind of get you familiar with working with materials in Max. So I'll go ahead and open up Max. I'm going to create just some simple objects. Throw down a plane here and maybe a box, and let's say a sphere and a cylinder, and we'll just use these just as our basic objects that we'll throw some materials on. So I'll show you some different types of materials and some different types of maps, and we can go from there. Alright, so the way you get to your material editor is you can hit M on your keyboard, or you can go here to the main toolbar and select Material Editor. Now in 2010, this is 2010 edition, or 2011 on, we have what's called the Material Slate Editor, and you'll probably, if you have a newer version of Max, you'll probably get that right off the bat. But there is ways of defaulting back to the standard material editor. I personally like the standard material editor, but we will cover the slate material editor in the intermediate and advanced lessons. But for this lesson we're just going to use this standard material editor. This is a very powerful editor, and it's really easy to use, and it's really easy to grasp. So we'll go ahead and work with this. You notice that whenever you bring up the material editor, it has a bunch of empty slots here, and if you move your mouse over the sections between these slots, you get your pan tool, and you can pan around, so you end up having 18 empty material slots that you can work with. And you can always, if you get all these full, you can always empty these out and start over again and still keep those materials in your scene. You'll notice that by default we have a standard material type. There are lots of different types of materials, but here, this button here shows you exactly what material we're working with in the active slot. And to activate a slot, you just click in the empty, or you just click in the window, and it becomes active. You have some different sample types. I'm just going to run through a few of these buttons here to kind of get you familiar with these. So you have different sample types. You can use a box sample type. Also, you can double click this little window here to maximize it off to the side and resize it here. So you have a sphere, cylinder, box. You have some different lighting options here. You have a backlight or no backlight. You have a background, and you can actually bring in your own custom background if you through the options tab if you wanted to do that. You have a sample UV, and this deals with how the material is tiled across this object, this sample object. A video color check checks your colors for any hot colors that may show up as some artifacts on a video screen. Preview, which is what deals with animated materials, and then you have your options dialog box. Has all the options for your material editor, how your material editor works, and you have some selection tools here. Select by material, and then you have your material map navigator, which we'll get into in just a second. And then along the bottom, get material. This resets this material slot with whatever material type of material that you have to choose from here. By default we have a standard material here, but there are lots of different types of materials. And then these here at the bottom with the little green square next to them, those are maps. Just one thing to remember when you're dealing with the material editor and with materials in Max, that materials are three-dimensional textures that you can put on objects. So these materials here that have the blue spheres next to them, these are complete materials that are made up of maps and different types of settings. And then these are below are maps. These are actually two-dimensional assets that you can bring into these materials and make them different. So always remember that you're working with materials and maps. Maps make up materials, and materials are the parent to the maps. So if you wanted to reset that material, you can do it here and create a different type of material. Put material to scene, assign material to selection, delete material, make a copy of the material, and make the material unique, which this you can make copies of materials just like with any object in Max. When you make a copy, you have the option of making an instance which propagates all the properties of that object to the sibling. So whenever you change one, the other changes automatically. And you can break that link here with this Make Unique button. Then you have a Put to Library button, which if you're building a library, say you're working on a complex scene and you want to keep all your materials for that scene in a separate library and give it a name of, let's say you're working on a city and you worked on the city model and you've got all these materials for the city. You could call this library city or city materials, and then it saves that material file out to whatever location that you specify, and it's basically a reference file that whenever you go back and get that material library, it references those textures and maps that you have saved in that library. So it's an easy way to keep up with all your materials for complex scenes. Let's see, the next one is Material ID channel. This deals with using sub-object materials and also with vertex color materials and a lot of gaming materials. You'll use a lot of material IDs. And show standard map in viewport. This toggles whether you can see the map in the viewport or not. So when we get into maps, I'll show you how that works. And then show end result just works just like with the modifier stack. If you want to see what the end result is on an object with all the materials and all the maps applied, you can use this button. If you want to save on memory, and you can turn off this button, and your viewport's going to move a little better, so it doesn't have to calculate all those materials in the viewport. And then these next two buttons is go to parent and go forward to sibling. So the parent would be the material, or you can also have maps embedded inside of maps. So you have parent maps and child maps, and then you have a go forward to sibling, which jumps from sibling to sibling inside the parent. So instead of going back up to the parent and back into the sibling, this is an easy way to navigate from one map to the next, or from one slot map slot to the next. Alright, and then when you'll notice there's lots of parameters just even in this, in the shader basic parameters, and I won't try to cover all of these, but I'll try to hit the high points on the things that you really need to focus on. The first thing is your diffuse color. Diffuse color is the color that your material is. That is the color that you will see whenever you render. That is the base color of your object. So if you want a blue object, you can click on that color swatch and get your color wheel here and change it to blue. Also, you have the option of bringing in custom maps, which we'll get to in just a second, but if you just wanted to be a color, then you would change that. And then you have an ambient color, which is the non-lit portion of your material, and then a specular color, which is the highlighted portion of your material. Self-illumination, if we turn that up, you can see it self-illuminates with that color. Opacity, and that is how transparent. I'll turn the background on here so you can see that, how transparent that object is. 0 opacity is totally transparent. 100 opacity is totally opaque. And then your specular level, this gives it that specular highlight. This grows that specular highlight, hardens it, or softens it. And then your glossiness gives it that hard shell look. So you use these two spinner buttons in conjunction with each other. So you can see here, if I turn up my specular level, that specular highlight just gets stronger, and then the glossiness really focuses that highlight. So you can see if it gets smaller, that gives the illusion that this is a shinier object. And then you have a soften spinner button, which softens all these different parts together, your diffuse, glossiness, and specular. Alright, we're going to skip the extended parameters and come back to those more in intermediate and advanced, and go straight to maps, because this is where you'll be working most of the time. Right off the bat, whenever you come into a material, you'll deal with the diffuse, which is whatever the color or pattern that's going to be on that material, and then you may adjust the specular and glossiness, and then you'll jump down into the maps and deal with things like bumpiness and reflection and those types of things. Coincidentally, the diffuse section here, the diffuse slot, also has a little empty button here next to it. This button is the same as this diffuse color button here. They go to the same place. So these are just kind of shortcuts next to the swatches. So this diffuse is the same as this diffuse, and this specular is the same as this specular. This specular level is the same as this specular level here. So you can use maps to define how much specularity and how much glossiness an object has. Alright, so let's say for this sphere, I want to make it look like a some type of beach ball. So I can go into my diffuse color slot here, and this brings up all my available maps that I can use in the material map browser. If I wanted to see these maps, a 2D version of these maps, I can go view icons, and here are all the different types of maps, and these are just procedural maps that come with Macs. Let's say we could use a checker box or checker map. Okay, and now that checker map material is pasted on my sample type. I'm going to go in and change a color to yellow, from black to yellow, and I think my specular is a little hot for a beach ball, so I'm going to turn that down a bit, and there we go. So with my sphere selected, I have a couple options of getting that material onto this object. I can drag it directly from the material editor and release it there. The way that I would do that is click and drag from this material editor and release my mouse button on the object, and then it applies it directly to the object. Or if you have a lot of objects in the scene and you're not comfortable with dragging onto a viewport, you could also use assign material to selection. So this is available whenever you have a highlighted material and a highlighted object. It says you're going to apply this material to that selected object, and that's what we'll do. You'll notice that whenever I apply that material, it doesn't look like the sample here. It gets the diffuse color by default in the viewport. So until you tell it, I want to see this map in the viewport, it's going to use that diffuse color, and this is just a graphics saving feature that Max has. So let's say we actually want to see our checker map in the viewport. We go up here to show standard map in viewport and click on that button, and there's our ball with the material on it. Alright. So that's basically really how you apply material to an object. It's simple as that. Now if we wanted to make put some type of texture on this where it's a bumpy texture, then we could go into the bump map material slot and use something like noise, which creates a bumpy effect based on low and high levels of a map. So the white areas would bump out, the dark areas would bump in. But for now, we'll just keep it simple. Let's say for this one we're going to go into the material, a new material slot, and I'm going to open up my maps, diffuse color, and let's say we want a wood texture. Now the wood texture in the wood procedural map in Max, it looks a little quirky, but for this lesson we'll use it. If I really wanted to have a realistic looking wood, I would use a bitmap, and I'll show you how to do that, but for now we'll do this. Show standard map in viewport, and there we go. So as simple as just a couple of steps. And then again, if I wanted to make that a little highlighted, turn up my specular, and there we go. Also, if I wanted to make this bumpy, I could use that same wood material, click and drag it down into my bump slot and release it, and it asks you if you want to make an instant copy or if I want to swap these two material slots, which means that this wood would go here and that would become empty. And I want to say I want to copy it, and then when you look closely at our wood material, it looks like we've got a little bit of a bump there, and you can turn up that here in this amount. Also, if you right click in your sample window, you have the option of, instead of drag and copy, you drag and rotate, and you get your little orbit tool which will rotate the sample for you. So kind of gives you a better view. Also, another note, you can right click here in an empty slot, and the sample windows are set by 5x3 sample windows, but you can also set them to 6x4, which shows you all the sample windows, or 3x2, which shows you just a portion, and you can still pan around, but basically it just zooms into those sets, those sample sets. Alright, and then we'll do another one here for this box. Let's say we want to do a tile. Let's make something like a gray Rubik's Cube. If we wanted to do an actual Rubik's Cube, it would take a little more than what I'm going to show you, but this would be a start. We would go in, open up our maps, diffuse color, and then we'll use tiles map, show map in viewport, assign material to selection. And then tiles actually has a lot of rollouts. Each one of these map types has lots and lots of parameters to play with. So I would suggest going in and trying some different ones, and that's to me that's the best way to learn. Go in and try some different types of materials, try some different slots. We're going to cover a lot of these slots, but most of them are self-explanatory. Some materials or some maps only work in certain slots. So for example, reflection maps, you can only put certain types of map types in the reflection slot, like for instance reflect and refract, or you have a ray trace reflection that you can put in there. But basically that's how you would assign materials. Now for this one I'm going to show you how to create your own a custom material or a custom map. So I would go into diffuse color, and bitmap, and this will let you go out on your computer and find some type of image that you can use as a map. So if you wanted to use the maps that come with 3D Studio Max, they are located on your C drive under Program Files, Autodesk, and then your 3D Studio Max folder, and then your Maps folder from there. So these are all the different types of maps that come with Max. You have lots and lots of maps to choose from. So just about everything that you would need are in these folders, unless you have really specific map type that you're looking for. You could go in Photoshop or some other 2D imaging software and create that map specifically. But let's say I want to go in and in my arch and materials, architectural materials, I'll say I want to go and do some type of a carpet. That looks good. And this is your bitmap map type, and you notice that as I'm working in these materials, as soon as I apply a diffuse map, it takes me directly to that map slot. So now I'm looking at all the parameters in that map slot, and then I go back up to the parent material. So go into the map slot, go up to the parent, and you can do that with all these maps. And then again, like I said before, you can jump from sibling to sibling. So if I had, for instance, on this wood material here, I'll go here and I can jump over to the bump slot and then jump back to the diffuse color slot just by clicking on go forward to sibling. Alright, so I have this carpet material. I'm just going to drag this over, and again, it doesn't show me the map in the viewport until I tell it to. And you can do this here either in the parent material, which will show you actually all the maps together, or you could go into any individual map slot and say I just want to see that map in the viewport. So you could do it either way. And let's say this pattern is way too big. I can go into my tiling and say I want that tile 10 by 10. So it takes that pattern and repeats it 10 times in one axis and 10 times in another axis. So that looks a little more realistic. And then there are lots of other options here. You can offset in one or two directions. You can rotate. You can view the image and crop it. So like if you only wanted to use a part of this map, you could go in and say view image, and it has some little cropping handles here, and then you have to check the apply button to see that work. Alright, and then this time rollout is for any animated maps. You can use AVIs and .movs as map types. So if this was let's say a TV screen, I could take that map and apply it directly to my TV screen and have some animation playing or some type of video playing on it. And this controls how that video plays. But I'm going to go back up to the parent, and I think that's about it. Like I said, this is just a basic materials lesson. We're really going to delve into materials a lot more in depth in later classes, so come back and check back, and we'll cover the new material slate editor, and we'll get into creating some real custom materials. So I hope you've enjoyed it. Come back and see us.